sini kampung. Padahal di sini belum ada kampung. Kampung masih di gunung. Itu ada dulu orang Portugis datang pertama kalinya. Jadi masyarakat yang sementara cari ikan di laut itu, yang meti ibu-ibu, mereka dia tanya, ini kampung apa? Mereka sudah naik karena lihat mereka matanya beda, hidungnya beda, kulitnya beda, semuanya beda. Mereka naik sembunyi di ujung pohon. Nah, waktu sembunyi di situ, tiba-tiba Portugis tanya, ini kampung apa? Haru ukui waktu ditanya, ini pohon apa? Mereka pikir ini pohon apa? Petani dan nelayan itu sudah merupakan ciri khas orang di kampung di sini. Kalau dia pergi ke hutan, pulang tidak ada ikan, ya terpaksa dia harus melaut. Jadi mereka punya itu fungsi ganda ya, sambil melaut juga berkebun, sambil berkebun juga melaut. Jadi semua kekayaan alam itu sudah ada, tinggal kita jaga kan. Nah, aturan-aturan adat, aturan kewang itu yang menjaga dan melindungi itu. Ya, saya dari masih remaja sudah ikut bapak tua ya. Bapak punya kakak. Dia pergi tugas kemana, dia selalu panggil saya ikut. Saya ini tidak tahu bahwa satu waktu nanti saya harus jadi kepala kewang. Dari masa moyang saya sampai ke saya itu, dari leluhur ya, sampai saya sudah generasi ke-7 kalau saya tidak salah gitu. Dan karena itu saya sangat menghargai karena perjuangan mereka untuk mempertahankan kewang dan sasi ini dari tahun 1600. Jadi karena itu semua orang mendengar tentang sasi lompa, mereka kaget. Di mana-mana orang mendengar, karena itu tidak ada di tempat lain, cuma hanya di Haruku. Jadi kalau ban kempis harus dipompa, pompa saja berulang-ulang. Dengar buka sasi lompa, tanda Haruku panggil pulang. Ya waktu muda juga ya, Om larang tidak boleh kemana-mana dulu. Tidak boleh mancing di Paknas, tidak boleh bermain di Paknas. Nanti hitam katanya, kulitnya nanti hitam. Jadi kita sering bermain, kalau lihat Om tidak ada di rumah, ya kita lari. Biar pulang nanti tidak dimarahi, tetapi tetap ya senang itu. Untuk melihat alam, bagaimana laut itu, dia punya keindahan alam. Bisa lihat ikan berenang sama-sama dengan kita. Tapi kalau sudah seperti sekarang lagi, sudah kalau terlalu banyak terendam air, rasa dingin. Tapi laut untuk saya itu sebagai sebuah hiburan. Itu keindahannya laut Maluku. Jadi kita harus jaga jangan dia tercemarkan. Mari mendaki Gunung Binaya bersama temanku bernama Daud. Kalau tahu itu berbahaya, mengapa Anda buang sampah di laut? Jadi warisan orang tua itu harus tetap kita jaga, kita lestarikan, kita lindungi sampai hari ini. Makanya ikan lompa itu sudah dari tahun 1600 sampai sekarang masih tetap ada. Jadi ikan lompa itu kita jaga dia selama 3 sampai 4 bulan baru dibuka sasi. Jadi bukan satu kali dibakar panggil dia terus dia datang terus langsung buka sasi, tidak. Selama 4 bulan dia pulang pergi. Dia datang terus dia masuk di sini jam 4 pagi ya. 4 pagi sampai jam 5 itu. Masuknya jam 4 pagi itu kita bakar daun nyur ini, daun nyur yang kering ini kita bakar di sana satu-satu ikat itu. Terus dia menyala, dia menarik ikan dari pulau seberang, dari pulau Ambon, dari mana-mana, dari laut. Dia masuk di sini terus 1 kilo lebih sepanjang kali ini. Jadi sepanjang kali ini ikan lompa sudah full. Jadi dia masuk. Nanti jam 4 sore dia keluar lagi dari sini terus pergi cari makan di laut. Besok panggil dia datang juga. Jadi tiap hari begitu.
Welcome and thank you for joining us today. I am Steve Box, the Chief Program Officer, and with me today are Sharon Young, the Chief Partnership Officer, and Courtney Cox, the Chief Technical Officer. And we're part of the executive team working with our CEO, Ibrahim Saidi, to support and guide Blue Ventures on the next stage of our exciting journey under the Thriving Fishers, Thriving Oceans strategy. We're talking to you today on behalf of an incredible BV team and dedicated partners and communities from around the world, all aligned on our shared goal of empowering communities on the front lines of the ocean and climate emergencies. Our aim today is to explain our strategy in more detail, provide an update on how our work has evolved and the progress we're making. And we want to set some expectations on what you will see from Blue Ventures between now and 2030. So for the agenda, you'll hear a bit from me outlining the general approach. Sharon will talk about the growing partner network and the Frontline Community Fund. Courtney will present on data for decision making and our training and learning agenda. I'll then pick back up again to highlight our work building coalitions and advocating for the rights and priorities of communities. Now, we recognize it's a lot to cover, but we will leave plenty of time for questions. So please add those questions or comments to the chat box. Now, you can do this at any time as things come to mind throughout this presentation. We'll then collate them and try and answer them all at the end. Now, this is the first of a planned series of webinars, and we aim to focus on specific themes and topics in subsequent sessions. So there's an ongoing opportunity to learn and discuss what's happening at BV. And so with that, let's begin. Now, Blue Ventures is focused on coastal communities. Our mission places communities at the center of solutions, recognizing the potential for them to be powerful agents of change to bring management and protection across coastal seas. We've estimated there are at least 85,000 coastal communities in the global tropics, with a total population of 225 million people. And many of these communities are far from urban centers or other sources of employment, and so are dependent on small-scale fishing for food and income. Now, small-scale fishing is a misnomer. It's a massive employer. It employs at least 60 million people, making it the largest marine employer in the space. And combined, the efforts of these small-scale fishers catch 25 million tons of fish a year, with a dockside revenue of $58 billion. Suffice to say, the scope and scale of community fisheries, their collective and cumulative influence over coastal waters, and the fundamental role they play in food and nutrition for nations around the world cannot be understated. Now, coastal waters also contain the most biodiverse ecosystems, with all of the mangroves and over 80% of coral reefs globally, all found within territorial seas. Yet, efforts to manage and protect these coastal areas have been limited in scope and efficacy. Only 11% of MPAs are in territorial seas, so within 22 kilometers of the coast. And it's been an ongoing challenge to bring top-down designations and conventional MPA planning principles into this high-use, high-complexity, high biodiversity environment of coastal waters. And effective fisheries management and the regulations that go with them, even where they exist on paper, similarly struggle in the remote, disparate, and dispersed context of small-scale fisheries. Fundamentally, centrally governed fisheries decisions have had limited influence on the reality of altering fishing behavior in rural communities. However, based on our mapping of coastal communities and global habitat distribution, we've seen an incredible opportunity to change the status quo. We estimate that at least a third of global coral reefs and mangroves are within the area of influence of coastal communities in the priority countries we're working in across Southeast Asia, East and West Africa, and Central America. This illuminates the incredible potential that empowering communities towards effective protection and management of their coastal areas could reach a globally significant proportion of these critical ecosystems. Now, very briefly, just to explain the calculation, we did this by counting communities across the coastlines of all of the tropics around the world. And then we estimated an arc of influence if they fish using small boats and low horsepower engines, which are typical in small-scale fisheries. And that means they can extend out from their community around 20 kilometers, which coincidentally takes them out to the boundary of territorial seas. And then by overlaying this influence layer across habitat maps of coral reefs, mangroves, and seagrass, we can estimate the area of influence of these communities on top of these habitats. We can then prioritize this further by focusing our efforts on the communities which are furthest away from other sources of employment, like proximity to urban centers, and the areas where communities have the most habitat under their potential influence, which would respond to area-based management approaches like community-based management and LMMAs. So connecting the dots on this underpins our strategy, developing the other path. Now, for decades, bottom-up efforts to build community-based fisheries management and locally managed marine areas have been recognized as effective ways to bring management and conservation to the habitats and fisheries that communities depend on. But now imagine the possibility of thousands of communities who have the proximity, permanence, and presence to affect real change across their areas, all taking local action that would be globally relevant. It would be unprecedented, a paradigm shift in how coastal seas are managed and protected at scale. But scaling local efforts has been a historic challenge. Localized efforts have been acting in isolation, often building really encouraging bright spots of hope, but project by project approaches have barely scratched the surface of the problem. Projects generally end before they reach appropriate ecological, social, or politically relevant scales, leaving many LMMAs and community-based management efforts trapped in perpetual pilot project or written up as case studies, but not reaching the scale of relevance that they have the potential to achieve. Starting with a pilot and then trying to reach scale through diffusion of innovation, simply encouraging neighboring communities to adopt similar strategies, whilst important, has not effectively addressed systemic barriers that hinder the adoption of this approach or enable communities to sustain their efforts through time. The lack of appropriate funding, limited data, silos in access to information, skills development, and the lack of political support or representative voice, meaning communities have been systemically marginalized, excluded, deprioritized, and ignored. We see these as the key systemic barriers that need to be overcome to generate a system change. And so here we're linking each of those barriers to the solutions that underpin BV's global strategy: the Frontline Community Fund, community data systems, training and learning, and building advocacy and influence. And we see immense potential in providing a systemic solution focused on unblocking these barriers and deliver a solution at scale that has been hidden in plain sight. And we'll talk about our approach to each of these today and hear from communities about their journey so far. Now, this didn't just magically appear. Blue Ventures has been focused on this issue since 2020 under the original Thriving Fishes, Thriving Oceans strategy. What we've done is renewed our commitment through to 2030 and set ourselves ambitious goals to catalyze, expand, and sustain locally managed marine areas and community-based fisheries management across 10,000 communities in areas where these communities have the highest dependence and the largest areas of critical habitat under their influence. And the 10,000 number is important because that's the scale of magnitude of the challenge, not just working with a few communities here and a few communities there, but intentionally looking at how you would break down systemic barriers to reach the scale of the problem. And what we've learned on this journey is that providing funding to enabling groups to focus on this issue is fundamental. And we launched the Frontline Community Fund to focus and prioritize this effort. We know that money alone is not enough, and communities need support to have relevant information on their fisheries and to link their traditional knowledge with data and other tools and use them to build locally relevant solutions without having to face every challenge alone or in isolation. We also know that the hardest step is the first one. This is the complex problem that can seem daunting, enabling communities to start with a simple, practical model, building their core skills that become the foundations for effective management, and then grow through sequential steps, building up management capability, whilst also focusing on how that community can secure the benefits in food and income for themselves. And we recognize that the voices of communities have remained out of earshot, and we can play an important role in helping to build and amplify that voice, both to promote their rights and their priorities at a national level, but also to work globally to push back on the pervasive threats to their ecosystems and ways of life, such as the threat of industrial fishing in nearshore waters. So, with that as context, I am going to pass over to Sharon to provide more details on the first theme of the strategy, the partner network frontline team.
Thank you, Steve. Hi, I'm Sharon Young, Chief Partnership Officer at Blue Ventures, and my role focuses on driving our strategy to scale impact by building enduring relationships with local communities and investing in the leaders who know their ecosystems best. The Partner Network team is designed to find and fund community-based organizations or the local NGOs that work with them. And the goal is to build agency at the community level and a dynamic global network where members can learn from each other, exchange experiences, and leverage the collective knowledge that is held by communities and practitioners around the world. Providing funding with multi-year commitments to enable communities to focus on establishing and sustaining locally managed marine areas and build mechanisms to help them capture, retain, and safeguard the food and income from their fisheries. Now, we recognize that many local organizations capable of driving change face persistent financial challenges. They're often caught in a cycle of patching together funding from various sources, forced to shift focus from issue to issue just to stay operational, and they struggle to have a multi-year vision because existing funding is often linked to short projects or political cycles. As a result, their work begins with promise but often stalls, losing momentum just as the groups are gaining traction and areas are formally established, leaving them stranded at the start line. By providing flexible funding and multi-year commitments, we enable these organizations to build on their achievements and deliver sustained cumulative impact. And by connecting groups across the network of peers, we build synergy that help inspire and sustain local efforts and overcome challenges as a collective rather than in isolation. Blue Ventures started regranting to local organizations in 2017 when we first expanded out of Madagascar. We knew we were on the right path to be investing in local groups who already had the trust and relationship with communities, rather than trying to build up our own capacity to hold all those deep connections directly. We have learned a lot along the way, and we've established the Frontline Community Fund as a long-term dedicated pool of funding for regranting to local organizations. This enables us to be risk tolerant and more flexible to help groups adapt to the realities they encounter along their own journey. We have a dedicated team in each region who are solely focused on finding organizations, building those relationships, and then accompanying them on the journey. We currently have 47 local community-based organizations in the partner network across 10 countries. And our goal is to double the number of partners in the network this year and double it again the following year on a pathway to reach 400 partners supporting 10,000 communities by 2030. And we fully expect demand to accelerate as the network grows, as more groups hear about the work of peers and want to join this grassroots movement. We are focusing on countries across 4 global geographies: Asia Pacific, the Western Indian Ocean, West Africa, and Latin America and the Caribbean. Within countries, we are intentionally clustering our efforts to identify prospective partners in priority areas to build network effects at multiple scales. And we have set up regional advisory councils to support these efforts and build a participatory process to expand the network within each region. Another important aspect of our partnership strategy is to continue to recognize that there are multiple unmet needs that communities struggle to address. Rather than trying to solve all these issues ourselves, we are forming strategic partnerships with specialist organizations, building synergies and aligned program delivery to reach communities across greater scales than we could do working alone. The first of these exciting partnerships is with Marie Stopes International, or MSI. We made a joint commitment as part of our Clinton Global Initiative last fall, committing to work together across Kenya, Tanzania, and Senegal to integrate our planning and programming to bring health and environment together to coastal communities. This builds on our long history of working together in Madagascar on health and environment programming, and we see immense potential in this synergistic approach. Our teams in East and West Africa are working together to map out this integration and leverage the experience and network of each organization as we begin to align. As we learn from this strategic partnership and coordinated approach, we will continue to listen to communities we serve and identify future partnerships with organizations to bring this much needed attention and to address the unmet needs. Beyond funding, the partner network and the Frontline Community Fund that supports it is not just about getting money where it is needed. It's about supporting local organizations on their own journey. As we learn about each organization, we can also support them to become stronger civil society groups aligned by a set of shared values. We support them with planning and strengthening the fundamentals. Are they legally established? Do they have clear governance? Do they have processes to manage money in a transparent and ethical way? Do they have the systems in place to make plans or a longer-term strategy? We can help build these core competencies, ultimately enabling groups to secure additional funding and using FCF grants for learning by doing. The collective learning and peer-to-peer knowledge exchanges, the unified voice for action as communities increasingly engage with government, and the growing belief that change is possible, being able to share their own successes and have pride in inspiring others, are all growing into a powerful grassroots movement. Now, let's see a short video from one of these incredible partners before my colleague Courtney continues.
Baik, terima kasih atas kesempatan yang diberikan. Perkenalkan, nama saya Hieronymus Palah. Saya di Yayasan Tanah Nua belum terlalu lama juga ya, tapi baru 34 tahun. Dia lahir karena kepedulian dari beberapa tokoh, dari diskusi-diskusi dengan mitra-mitra bahwa NTT secara khusus di Sumba itu kemiskinan penduduknya cukup tinggi, kemudian kerusakan lingkungan juga cukup tinggi akibat dari ulah manusia. Dan misi utama dari Yayasan Tanah Nua awal itu melihat kesejahteraan lahir dan batin adalah hak dan tujuan semua manusia, laki-laki dan perempuan. Kemudian tujuan terkuat dari itu adalah meningkatkan taraf hidup, perbaikan kehidupan, dan juga perbaikan kondisi sumber daya alam yang rusak. Lalu pada tahun 2019, datanglah kawan-kawan dari Blue Venture, itu mitra yang kami sangat tidak kenal apa-apa. Dan kami bawa mereka ke 3-4 desa, mereka lihat, berdiskusi dengan masyarakat, seperti apa pekerjaan kami, kemudian mereka lihat, dan itu bersepakat dengan kami untuk bagaimana memberikan pengetahuan kami tentang pentingnya laut bagi kehidupan ini. Kami di Tanah Nua bersama beberapa nelayan itu berkunjung, dibawa oleh BV ke Sulawesi Utara. Sebelumnya ke Banggai Laut belajar bagaimana orang di sana. Ini sekarang kalau misalnya omong tentang laut, pasti semua minta Tanah Nua bisa mulai berbicara. Untuk kami pertama berterima kasih juga sekali lagi untuk BV. Dia tidak hanya perhatikan untuk urusan program. Dan selama sekian lama saya berada di Tanah Nua, ini baru BV yang mulai memberikan dana yang biasa disebut di bahasa LSM, fee untuk organisasi. Jadi dana yang tadi fee organisasi yang diberikan oleh BV salah satu juga termasuk juga untuk kesejahteraan orang bangun yang bisa mengakomodir supaya semua orang bekerja dengan aman. Tidak semua orang bekerja kemudian dalam keadaan panas dan sebagainya. Itu kami malah bersyukur sekali ketika datangnya BV, ketika menawarkan Tanah Nua untuk bekerja sama, kami tolak dulu pertama karena apa? Karena kami sumber daya sangat terbatas. Tapi kami bersyukur dan berterima kasih kepada tim BV yang kemudian tidak jenuh-jenuh. Kurang lebih 6 bulan, mereka tuh datang setiap bulan tuh kadang-kala 2 kali, kadang-kala 1 kali. Dan itu bersepakat dengan kami untuk bagaimana memberikan pengetahuan kami tentang pentingnya laut bagi kehidupan ini. Karena ini adalah istana kita ini, istana kita, tambang emas kita ada di depan kita ini. Tidak perlu jalan jauh. Itu manfaat yang dirasakan oleh masyarakat ya.
Thank you, Sharon, and hello, everyone. I'm Courtney, Chief Technical Officer, and I will be sharing how we support data collection and use, along with training and learning resources that underpin the funding from the Frontline Community Fund. So let me start with data for decision-making. One of the issues that we've seen across the world is that small-scale fisheries continue to struggle with actually having data. What's being caught, how much it's worth, what species are communities dependent on, and it's very difficult to manage anything, not just fisheries, without information. There has been a systemic underreporting of small-scale fisheries by governments, but the problem is deeper than that. Communities themselves has historically had almost no information about their own fisheries, and this has caused them to be reliant on memory to measure change. We've been focused on solving this challenge at scale with the ambition that all communities we support can collect and use their information to inform their own management decision-making. We built and launched a fisher-centric data system in 2023 based on some basic principles to provide catch data collected by communities back to them and analyzed in usable forms in near real time. We wanted to address historic issues with data collection projects, which were often overly complex, struggled with bottlenecks for analysis and interpretation, and often resulted in information being extracted, but not actually enabling a community to inform their decisions. We built the system specifically for partners and communities to use. They are our clients. They own the data, they decide how the data is collated and shared. The system is simply a platform to help overcome logistical and technical challenge in how to collect, verify, analyze, and interpret data. Starting with one partner to test the system in 2023, we expanded to 15 partners across Indonesia in 2024, and then across to partners and communities in Madagascar, Timor-Leste, East Africa, West Africa, and Belize. In parallel, we built a simple social and economic survey tool so community-focused organizations could start monitoring important changes that happen in communities as they implement locally managed marine areas. And we've been collating spatial data as well and habitat maps to build geographic information systems with straightforward outputs that help communities understand the extent and quality of the habitats in their areas and design optimal boundaries of their locally managed areas and make effective management decisions. And the adoption curve has really been incredible. Recognizing this system was solving a broader problem, we partnered with RARE's Fish Forever program to connect up communities they supported so that all their fisheries data could flow through the same cutting-edge analytics and dashboards to support community interpretation and use. Today, 638 communities across 15 countries are connected to the system, including historical data uploaded from archived databases. The system has recorded over 89,000 tons of fish and shellfish landed, valued at more than $220 million. And we continue to expand support of the system. Each new partner and community are able to connect up and, after some simple training, be able to sustain their own data pipelines. We're finding that when communities are empowered to collect basic data and assess local conditions, it quickly builds awareness and understanding through a shared framework. The data that they see often validates their lived experiences and aligns with what they've sensed is happening in their fisheries. Having access to data helps make community concerns tangible. It can help identify priorities, structure choices, and explain decisions they want to make, and it gives a mechanism to measure their own success. Data truly brings power to the communities. The first version of the system was built for immediate use. This was intentional. We didn't over-design it. We built it knowing that this was a starting point. And now we want the users, the communities, the community-based organizations to help shape the future of the system and co-design for optimal functionality. Version 2 is already in development, and we're actively listening to feedback, gathering suggestions, and following a user-centric design process to guide this next phase. And as communities engage with the existing system, they're identifying what's missing or unclear, what information they want to access, how they'd like it to be presented, and how they want to interact with it. And we're using all of these insights to make targeted adjustments in the next version. We're building a synergy between the data tool and the power of a growing user network, enabling continuous learning, iteration, and the ability to deliver the information communities truly need. I'll dive deeper into the data systems features in a future webinar, but suffice to say, there's a lot under the hood for those who want to explore further. Now, I'd like to briefly touch on the training and learning component of our strategy. Our role isn't to tell communities what to do or assume that we all have all the answers, but through our work with dozens of organizations and hundreds of communities, we've observed a consistent set of challenges that emerge. And despite the inherent differences in the rich diversity of coastal contexts, communities are increasingly recognizing that the world is changing at an unprecedented pace, driven by shifting weather patterns and fish distributions due to climate change, as well as a global race to fish. Demand for key species is reaching even the most remote areas, intensifying pressure and competition with industrial fishing vessels. We recognize that many existing solutions and approaches exist that communities can build upon and learn from, but a key barrier has been access to information and appropriate training and learning materials in a format and logical sequence that meets communities where they are. Fundamentally, we recognize the hardest step in making change is just starting, and that can be very daunting if the challenges seem overwhelming and timescales to solutions too long. To unlock this barrier, we've created a simple learning framework enabling communities to start without having everything figured out for themselves. We call this the community pathway model. This is a simplified journey map that enables a community to identify their starting points and a path forward through sequential phases. Catalyze, iterate, expand, sustain, and map out achievable goals with tangible benefits under each phase. We built the model around 4 pillar themes: community-based fisheries management and secure rights, leading to legal and functional locally managed marine areas, alongside financial inclusion and food security, leading to financially and food secure households. Communities and their supporting partners can use the community pathway to assess their existing capabilities and identify starting points within each pillar. It helps them to develop simple plans and set achievable targets for each phase, setting realistic expectations while also building awareness of what lies ahead. Blue Ventures can then identify what type of support they're likely to need as they progress. This is not a prescription, however. It is a mechanism to enable communities to build on their existing knowledge and skills, access relevant information, training and tools, and be able to leverage additional knowledge that may be generated just down the coast or from another side of the world. Within the community pathway model, we're developing curriculum and resources to support this training and learning journey, enable scale, and provide support for a wide range of partners around the world. As with our approach to the data system, we aim to continuously evolve both the content and formats based on feedback from partners and communities. And rather than go into detail about each of the pillars and the theory behind them, which the training and learning team will explore further in a webinar series, here's a video that shows what this approach looks like in practice. And after that, I'll hand it back to Steve to talk about our advocacy work.
Ya, pertama kali saya belajar melaut dengan saya punya om 8 tahun karena di sini saya bisa mencari di laut, hasilnya bisa mencukupi untuk kami. Lautnya sudah kami bisa dari kecil, kami sudah biasanya laut sini biar.
Saya kira BV juga menjadi pertama mengajar untuk bagaimana pendataan yang baik. Kami tidak mengerti aplikasi, tapi ketika BV masuk, ini mulai dari Kobo.
Yang dilakukan pertama yaitu kita menimbang hasil nelayan punya, biorka nelayan punya. Ya, ada seperti itu. Kalau dulu kita tulis tangan dan kita tidak mengikuti Kobo, sekarang kita bisa langsung ikuti Kobo juga.
Hasilnya, oh ini satu orang macam Om Tato sekian kilo, uangnya sekian, kan secara sepuas. Oh ini sih di harga sekilo. Bukannya kami sendiri, dengan bapak orang sini juga, orang tua adat juga. Oh hasilnya lebih bagus. Kamu sistem harus begitu saja.
Yang sangat baik dan pendataan yang saya pikir luar biasa, sangat membantu organisasi sehingga kami dokumen pendataan sangat bagus dan juga dan pendataan untuk pelapor menjadi sangat mudah.
Kemarin di bulan Juni sampai dengan September itu kita melakukan penutupan dan dibukanya di bulan September dan itu hasilnya sangat banyak. Harapannya untuk nelayan semoga hasil tangkapannya lebih baik, untuk pendapatan nilai jualnya lebih baik dan buat kesejahteraan masyarakat itu sendiri.
Thank you, Courtney, and what a fantastic video as well. So our advocacy efforts aim to secure small-scale fishers' rights to the access, use, and management of their traditional fishing grounds, as well as protecting coastal areas from the pervasive threats from more powerful interests, such as coastal infrastructure development, the expansion of aquaculture, and industrial fishing. Our approach is to build coalitions at national and regional levels, as well as focus on global campaigns against specific threats. Our approach is to support civil society organizations, LMMA networks, and fisher associations and other partners to organize and be a force for change at all levels. Coastal communities are often far away from the centers of power. They're lacking in representation and have been systemically marginalized and excluded from important decisions about their coastlines and the access and use and management of those ecosystems that they depend on. We're changing that. We're building cohesive messaging and aligning efforts to all push in the same direction, placing these communities and their rights and priorities at the center of the solution. We are strengthening groups with policy guidance and coordinating efforts to leverage the power of collective voice. And we're empowering advocates with data and evidence to support their positions and illuminate the real-world consequences of the status quo, what is happening to these systems because of existing influence from these outside forces. And we're supporting specific efforts in regions around the world and taking campaigns directly to the source, such as in Europe, where harmful EU subsidies for industrial fisheries and support of distant water fleets are driving competition with communities in the global tropics. And we're aiming to address that imbalance. Now, our largest global campaign to date is the Transform Bottom Trawling Coalition, which was launched in 2022. This coalition has grown incredibly and now has over 100 partners from 42 countries, all aligned on the shared goal of pushing back on the threat of destructive bottom trawling in coastal waters. Each partner engages on the issue in different ways and through different angles, but all aiming at the same objective: to protect coastal waters from trawling, build transparency and accountability in fisheries decision-making, and shift policy and legislation away from destructive fishing, which are not only destroying coastal ecosystems, but also destroying the livelihoods and futures of coastal people. And we've launched a specific advocacy small grants program, now in its second cycle, to support and sustain these efforts, enabling groups to build their momentum around this issue, engage with government, travel to participate in key events, and ensure representation and participation from those that have previously been ignored. There's clear synergy between these efforts, working to strengthen civil society, to work at multiple levels and influence local, regional, and national governments so that they become more receptive and responsive to the rights and priorities of these communities, and recognize the efforts that these communities are delivering to bring management and protection to the coastal zone. And at the same time, elevating these issues to the global stage to build momentum and create systemic change so that these voices are not forgotten. And to better explore the context of this, here's a short video from Senegal to really give you a better sense of what this movement building and advocacy work looks like.
Parce que les années 80, il y avait beaucoup de poissons. Il y avait beaucoup de poissons transformés, on gagne de l'argent. Mais actuellement, avec la raréfaction de la ressource, les coûts deviennent de plus en plus chers. On gagne peu.
Parce que vraiment, quand tu vois les pirogues débarquer le jour, parce qu'il y a beaucoup de pirogues, mais il n'y a pas beaucoup de poissons. Mais quand tu vas, tu peux voir beaucoup de poissons. Mais vu le nombre de pirogues, tu te dis que vraiment, il n'y a pas de poissons.
Et ça a été dû peut-être au changement climatique, mais avec les mauvaises pratiques de pêche, mais aussi avec la pêche industrielle qui vraiment détruit les habitats marins, mais aussi nous empêche de faire correctement notre travail en mer.
Valable. Mais sous nous, en tant qu'acteurs artisanaux, quand on part à la mer, on voit plus de 200 bateaux industriels. Donc, on ne sait pas qui est valable ou qui n'est pas valable.
Où il y a beaucoup de chaluts, beaucoup de bateaux qui sont dans cette zone. La majeure partie des bateaux qui sont au Sénégal pêchent dans la zone centre. Ça veut dire qu'on est très impacté. Donc, à travers ce projet de plaidoyer, ça permet maintenant aux pêcheurs.
Pour regrouper tous les acteurs de la pêche dans une organisation, pour réfléchir ensemble pour qu'il y ait une pêche durable. Parce qu'il y avait une difficulté. Parce que les CLPA et les autres organisations ne parlaient pas le même langage en domaine de gestion des ressources, parce qu'ils ne se comprenaient pas. Mais lorsque nous avions eu l'initiative de mettre en place cette coalition-là, de plus en plus, les pêcheurs commencent à s'entendre.
C'est difficile, c'est pas facile. Mais nous essayons ensemble avec nos partenaires comment on peut faire pour faire revenir les ressources.
Parce que le secteur demande ça. Il y a une urgence. Avec l'aide des organisations, les ONG et l'État du Sénégal, on peut arriver à ça. C'est possible.
Donc à travers les moyens de Boulventure, mais pas seulement les moyens, mais aussi sur l'apport technique que Boulventure a apporté, qui nous a permis de faire une stratégie. C'est le touche que le CONAPED a amené pour montrer que les pêcheurs, effectivement, sont des êtres humains et qui réfléchissent et qui peuvent trouver des solutions.
Now we know we have shared a lot of information in a relatively short time, but as you can tell, we are really excited about this strategy, the all of org effort behind it, and the very real opportunity and potential it presents to reshape the way coastal areas are managed and protected by placing communities at the heart of this solution. BV has been on an incredible journey to get to this point, building on our track record, our own experience, and the experience of our partners. We have spent time to thoughtfully review our progress and evaluate evidence while listening deeply to communities and the partners that work with them. We've identified the successes and the challenges from the past 5 years and more. We've updated our model based on this learning and restructured teams around this strategy. We've invested in attracting or retaining the capability and expertise required to achieve our ambitious goals, and invested in the systems and the capacity to sustain the planned work trajectory. But the biggest takeaway I hope you have from this session is that we've recognized the power and potential that has been hidden in plain sight. And our commitment is to unlock that through funding, through data and training, and through advocacy. And we're all committed to enabling coastal communities, and through our collective efforts with incredible partners around the world, are bringing real change that will benefit both people and nature. Thank you very much for listening. And as I promised at the beginning, we're going to leave time for questions so that we can respond in real time to additional things that you'd like to learn more about. It can also help us frame subsequent sessions within this webinar series if there are specific things that we really want to dig in on, and we're really open to hear more from you. So let's take the first question that have come in from the chat. And this one is for you, Courtney. What are the biggest problems or challenges that you have encountered or may encounter in scaling data collection? And the second part of the question, do governments have access to this data?
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question. So first on the challenges, from what I've seen in the past and what really drove the development of the system that we're using now is the challenge of simply getting the tools into the hands of the community members that motivate them to continue collecting. I think that sustaining data collection has been a challenge for a lot of organizations and projects. And what I found is that really came down to the tool. If the tool was simple enough to collect the data, and if they could see the data in as quickly as possible. The barrier that we mentioned during the webinar, where data wasn't coming back to communities. And that's something that I've seen is really exciting and motivating. And then working with partners to get those tools into the hands and train the communities on using them is a challenge for scaling, but one that we are actively addressing, and our model is working towards.
Can I ask you the second part of the question about government access to the data? What does that look like?
So the government access to the data, the data is owned by the communities. So they are the ones who are providing access and consent for the data to be shared with the government. So yes, the system was built as a collective platform that can be shared and to facilitate data sharing. So yes, governments can have access, but ultimately, we are really striving to put the data ownership in the hands of the community.
Excellent. And I actually have a second question from the chat also for you, Courtney. What are the on-the-water measures that communities implement as part of the management?
The on-the-water measures are, if I'm understanding this question correctly,
I believe the on-the-water measures mean the management measures. So what are the approaches to community-based fisheries management that a community might apply?
Okay, great. So we are working towards multi-species, multi-approach strategies. And in the first phase of community-based fisheries management, the development of a management plan is in the catalyzed stage. And so focusing on the species first, and then training communities to make decisions around those species and choose the most appropriate management strategies, whether it is a seasonal closure, a permanent no-take zone. So we're mixing area-based management and non-area-based management approaches. So also including gear restrictions, size limits. So really focusing on what is going to be most effective for those particular species of interest.
Thank you, Courtney. Now a question for you, Sharon, also from the chat. There's curiosity to learn more about the beyond funding opportunities that members of the Frontline Community Fund receive, in particular the training or organizational capacity building activities. So if you can talk more about that. It's a long question there, but we'll answer briefer.
Thank you, Stephen. It's a great question, and it's one of the things that sort of set the Frontline Community Fund apart from from traditional grant making, which is that we go beyond the funding and really invest in building the capabilities of our partners with the end goal of building agency at the community level. So once a partner has been identified, we embark on a journey together and develop a long-term vision along with that partner as to where their role, how would they fit into the whole framework of community-based fisheries management, and what it is that they would like to get out of this partnership. And a lot of it includes building their institutional capabilities, strengthening them, strengthening their leadership capabilities, their governance, and really making sure that we are investing in those core areas that they need to be a viable entity for their communities. So the beyond funding is really beyond transactional. The relationship is beyond transactional, meaning that we're just not here to provide funding, but our team actually learn about what the community is interested in, how it's through its local organization, whether it's a fishing association or a beach management unit, how that community wants to play a leading role in advancing the management of its fishing areas, and how we, through the FCF, leverage that support for them, ensuring that we're providing not just the funding, but all of those the accompanying support that they need to build their capabilities, not just organizationally, but technically, and then make sure that we're there to continue to coach and mentor and support them in the long term, and then bringing them together in that network. So they're learning from other peers. So it's not just one partner, but it's a network of partners at national and regional and global levels.
Perfect. And just one extension from another question on working with organizations and communities. How are we strengthening their ability to build sustainable funding pipelines and strengthening their planning and operations so that they can transition to a more resilient marine conservation organization or community group? So just extending your existing answer to include the funding piece. Yes,
and I mean, funding is always one of the critical issues that come to bear for community-based organizations. So, but by design, some of these organizations that we're working with, for instance, the beach management unit, they have a legal role, and part of that legal mandate is for them to serve as a sustainable mechanism in their communities to support fishing areas. So we're honing in on what are unique to those community groups and how we can help them organically develop those financial viable mechanisms for them that's unique to them, looking at options that those organizations can explore to generate income and have some sort of sustainable revenue generating mechanisms as part of the organizational design. Individually at the Fisher level, we do have a very interesting or objective of focusing on financial inclusion. So we look at communities through that lens. How can we support at the household level, at the Fisher level, strengthening their ability to go from an informal, an informal arrangement to a more formal arrangement, tapping into, the financial systems and how they can, again, by what's unique to them, develop their own ability to be financial literate, to be part of a broader system that supports them financially. So it's a number of different factors that's at play when we talk about partnerships.
Thanks, Sharon. Back to you for this one, Courtney. What factors have you found lead to success in scaling impacts of the initial fisheries management within a community and to other communities? So I assume linking to the pathways of catalyze, iterate, sustain, expand. What does that look like?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So the factors that we found, a couple of them, the first, and which is part of the first phase, is building a strong management group and building the capacity of that management group to adapt the initial management plan and expand it. So initially starting with a priority species, suggesting that start with a priority species that we know will respond to management pretty quickly, and then expanding out from there based on that success. So really viewing this as an evolving being, and that these areas can start small and grow bigger and grow into more species, which leads to, I see your next question.
I'll jump in so that everyone knows where you're going. What other species beyond octopus have communities started to manage? Where are we going?
So focusing a lot on reef species, again, going back to the equipping people with the communities with the information on which species will respond to particular management measures. Reef associated species will be those that will respond to area-based management, nearshore area-based management. Also invertebrates, crabs, mangrove crabs are another that we've been focusing a lot on. So yeah, starting with the octopus, expanding out to other species. We have a lot of data that's being collected on other species. And so in many of the communities that we're working with, the data is being used at this point to help expand out those management plans and strategies to make decisions about how to best manage for these additional and a truly multi-species approach.
Perfect, thank you. I think we've got time for probably a couple more. And there's one on how do we prioritize which communities to support first and build partnerships with. Maybe I can start with the first part of the answer, which is, and we addressed it slightly in the presentation, around having mapped where all the communities are and mapped where these critical habitats are, and we can prioritize communities that are likely to be highest dependent on coastal fisheries, which are linked to these critical habitats, because the approach is an area-based management approach, LMMAs, and community-based fisheries management. So it's appropriate for communities that have fisheries which are linked to these habitats. It's not appropriate for highly migratory fisheries or fisheries that occur far offshore. They need to be proximate to these communities. And by doing that work, we've been able to prioritize areas within each of the countries that we're focused on. And from that, we can then look for partners in those regions within a country and build out those networks. either of you want to add beyond that?
No, I think that's good, Steve.
This one is for you, Sharon. Can you tell us more about the regional advisory councils and who are the members and what is their role? And with a note on the time, we've only got a couple of minutes, so
okay. I'll be quick. Yeah, so good question again. The Regional Advisory Council, and a lot of people are interested in this. So the Regional Advisory Councils, they're made up of local experts, including community leaders and partner representatives. They have deep knowledge of the regional context, and their primary role is really to guide partner selection, to ensure that there is transparency in decision making. They help identify priority organizations for funding, and advise on regional scaling strategies. They really provide critical local insights to ensure that we fund organizations with strong community trust and alignment to our mission. Some of those things that you mentioned earlier, Steve, in terms of how we prioritize communities. So they're really a key mechanism, and we've launched the Regional Advisory Council for Asia a few months ago, and we intend to set up councils in all the other regions in the coming months. So it's really a good mechanism to ensure local ownership and regional relevance based on their expertise and their knowledge of the issues in their communities.
Perfect, thank you. And with that, we're at time, and we want to be respectful that you've given us an hour of your day, and that's the most valuable gift that you can give, your own time. We hope you've enjoyed this session. We will be doing other webinars, and we will try and address the additional questions in those webinars. It will help inform the level of detail that we can try and get to. And with that, I'd just like to thank everyone for joining. It is so important for you to understand what we're aiming at and get excited by this, but also to provide feedback. Ask us the tough questions. We do not have all the answers. We need thought partners in this space to work and build better. And before everyone just drops off, we've got a little exit video that I truly believe captures the miracle of ocean regeneration. But with that, from me, from the panel here, from the partners and communities around the world, thank you so much.
Salama. Zahay manao survey amin'ny tek zone sy grâce Antsaragna Soato. Tena trop, tena mahavelombolo ny fia agnatiny réserve maharitsy ahoriagna Antsaragna Soato. Dao fa ampanenteko azy nareo zay nanik zao magniry gazy atoa de dao
Baru TV reserva udah Antsaragna Soato fara tapo. Zahay siasa ty mila galifana ty soroatsasy ato. Karaza cité ici gato.
Reserva Antsaragna Soato. Vale? Throw. Throw na. Ah! Ay, rawa.